Kate Philp. Kate, how are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Nick. It's awesome to speak to you again.
It's awesome to speak to you. I feel like we've spoken for a bit, but we haven't seen each other for a while, so it's lovely to have you on screen with me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been too long.
And it really had. It always is. Listen, you've tested your abilities and yourself in the most demanding situations out there, whether it's in the army or post-army. Describe to us how you feel during those times and how you feel when you're in the atmosphere of the heat of the cauldron, I suppose.
Gosh, yeah, that's a wow. That's quite a big one to start.
I don't hold back.
Let's not get settled in.
We're only given a few minutes, so we might as well do it while we've got the time.
No, that's fine. I'm good with shock of capture. No problem. Yeah, it's. I guess in some ways it's like any new environment you go into. It's weird and it's kind of scary because it's weird and unfamiliar. And so there's a certain amount of just getting used to it. But of course, you then put on top of that the fact that you are in a hostile environment. You're in a country to which you perhaps haven't necessarily been invited. So you're very conscious of that and the fact that there's all sorts of different tensions going on. But you've just got to remember that you're there to do a job and not to sort of question that too much, albeit, you need to obviously do it within the best of your abilities and keep everyone safe. And so I think quite quickly the place becomes a bit more familiar, and that helps you to kind of settle in, and you start establishing a kind of routine and going about your job, and that all helps as well, kind of just to sort of de-weird it, if I can use that sort of word. You're trying to kind of introduce familiarity, I suppose, by that kind of routine and starting to build relationships where you are. So it's definitely scary, but you're not there on your own. You've got your team around you, so that's for me the main thing, that yes, heightens the responsibility, but also makes you very focused on what the priority is, which is to keep your people safe.
So my flippant question to you would be something about, is that why now you speak to replicate that fear? But I'm not going to ask you that question. But tell me this, kind of, obviously you have an immense amount of training and kind of before you go out into the field or whatever you want to call it. How much do you fall back on your training? How much does it become part of you, or how much is it instinct and built within you from the outset?
Oh, massively. I think it's all about that, and it's partly the specific pre-deployment training that you do in the few months leading up to that particular operation, but it's also kind of going way back. So for me, that first year in the army, which was at Sandhurst, so all that I learned about kind of leadership of self, as well as leading other people and teamwork and all that kind of stuff. And then I think one of the great things about the army, one of the advantages, is that we are drip feeding that training all the time, so we're reinforcing and embedding it, so you're not just kind of focused on that short period before you deploy.
And how well do you think now you're kind of out kind of in regular life, or whatever you want to call it, and you're working with businesses as a consultant, as a coach, as a speaker, how much do you see businesses are good at that level of training for their employees, or how much do they only go so far?
I think businesses in general don't do nearly as much training as we did in the military, but I think we would sort of, it'd be impractical to think that they could. I mean, I very often reinforce how useful it is, how important it is to keep embedding it, in little ways over time, as opposed to just a kind of a one-off intervention every so often. But you've got to be realistic about the fact that these organizations need to run themselves, and ultimately the big difference from the military is that they need to make a profit, so I get all that, but I just think I guess it's about being quite smart about your training, so how you best use your time, and certain interventions at certain levels, for example. So whether you're introducing a new apprentice or a graduate, or if it's kind of someone's first management experience, or when they're transitioning up into senior management, there are key points in people's careers where a really dedicated time of training is I think really helpful and really important. But I think if you can get into the mindset of kind of testing and continuous improvement, you can do your own training really subtly without it being terribly formal and onerous, and putting I think one of the most useful things is kind of creating scenarios that that you might face in real business life, and testing how you would react in those, because that's really what we're doing in the military all the time, is putting ourselves in situations that we think might occur. And I think that's one of the key things that perhaps businesses don't do that I think they could make more use of.
I think it's really interesting, as you're saying, I've got to think to myself, how often do you talk to your employees or talk to your team about the end game? Whereas presumably when you're in the military, you know where you're going, because it's the biggest risk. It's a life risk rather than just business risk. That's constantly in your mind. Maybe we forget when you're sitting at your desk about actually the game you're in, I suppose, for want of a better word.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to get bogged down with the day-to-day that it's really hard to forget what the overriding purpose is of what you're trying to do. And so if you can try and kind of really imbue that spirit in people rather than it just perhaps being on a piece of paper on the wall, then I think that really does help to keep people going. And also I think it's very much about empowering people and really allowing them to use their initiative. And I think that's one of the misconceptions about the army. People think it's just about giving a set of orders and we go do, but actually it's so the reverse of that. It's, yes, being very clear about your mission, but it's allowing each individual part to work out how they're going to achieve that mission. So you tell them the what and the why, but you don't tell them the how. And that allows for then massive flexibility when, the great military saying of no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's the same in business, right? You can plan and plan and plan, come out with this great plan, but actually once you start putting it into action and executing it, something goes wrong, something happens that you hadn't anticipated, and you've got to flex and adapt. Now, if you've got people who are empowered and are comfortable using their initiative, they will adapt and they will enact some contingency plan that you've thought of, or just something that they have creatively brought up themselves, that they know they are trusted to put that into action and give it a go.
So let me ask one final question, which is always fascinating to me. Like, obviously, kind of Sandhurst brings out the most incredible military leaders, who then take leadership in a way, because of the fact they don't lead by telling people what to do, they lead by empowering others. How far away is business from developing those leaders, I suppose, and actually do we need a complete rethink in business society in order to get that done?
Well, I think there are plenty of organizations out there that are already doing it. They really are. So I'm absolutely not sitting here saying the military know very much how to do it and business doesn't. Definitely not. And also the military can learn an awful lot from business, and thankfully that is now happening as well, which I think is really refreshing, but really important to see. So no, I think there are certain organizations that are already doing it. I think younger growing organizations it's probably easier for them. It's easier for them to adapt and to kind of take that bit of risk. I think for those bigger, more established businesses out there, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to affect that change because you're responsible for a whole lot more, aren't you? So the risk is that much greater. But I personally think it's a risk worth taking. It's just I guess, like with all things, and this is where my coaching very much comes in. You've got to kind of attack things a little bit at a time, and kind of small changes over a period of time are generally what work best and are most sustainable.
And with that bit of advice, Kate, thanks so much for your time. Have a lovely day.
That's a pleasure. Thanks so much, Nick.